Hello, I'm Malcolm Haslett. Remember Saturday night at the movies? Whatever happened to them? Whatever happened to the cinemas that were dotted all over town and in the suburbs? Well, we'll find out more next on OurTime. I used to love going to the movies, and I guess you probably did too. Our special guest in this episode of OurTime is Damian Woodards. Damian, welcome.
Thank you, Malcolm.
It's not quite like going to the movies though, television, is it?
No, not the same.
It used to be a whole dress-up thing. People would dress up in their finest and turn up to the movies. This is probably going back, well, pre-1959, I think.
Yeah, and also you had to book. So if you wanted to get in on to see a new release film, you had to book probably 3 or 4 days in advance. So,
and you had to get an actual ticket, a cardboard ticket.
Yes, and a numbered seat.
And numbered seat, yes. The beautiful thing, well, beautiful I suppose, not so much these days because we're so used to widescreen and, well, even our TVs at home, but we're so used to the big widescreen movies now. But remembering that most of the cinemas, the old, really decorated cinemas, were really for square screens, weren't they?
That's right, yes.
Which is why you have such, I suppose, ornate proscenium arches. That's the thing that goes around the screen, with curtains that went up or parted, and they were great. So what did you do, or what's your passion in life for the next few years?
Oh, well, I think it's to complete this project which I've started, which is looking at the Adelaide's former city picture theatres, right? So we had a high concentration.
We did.
In Hindley Street and Rundle Street, a couple off there. Yes. And in comparison to, say, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, you know, we had a really strong, vibrant entertainment precinct and neon signs everywhere. And some people said it was second to Broadway when it was up and about.
Well, when you look at some of the old photos, you can see that it's like electricity came, and everyone went mad with the signs. Every theatre had big billboards of signs out the front with the lights running, dotted lights running around, often running around as well. But you've sort of reborn the Rex cinema. Now, I must admit, when we talked originally about this and about your documentary that you've made, I was trying to remember where was the Rex cinema. I was going through all these cinemas I used to go to as a child, and I couldn't remember it. But when I saw it, I remembered it straight away. When I saw the facade of it, I remembered it straight away. So before we go any further, let's take a look at just 30 seconds of the documentary you've made, Damian.
Located in Rundle Street, it was slightly east of the wonderful Regent Cinema, and it was built in 1912 as the Pavilion. Of course, that was from the silent era, so it wasn't around in those days. But it didn't become the Rex until 1933. But once it became the Rex, it became the Paramount Theatre of Adelaide, and that's.
So, Damian, why the Rex?
Okay, well, the Rex was the first picture theatre to fall to the advent of television in the early 60s. And also, I just thought it's also a very unique picture theatre in comparison to all those other old cinemas. It had a balcony. And
it did. And people could go outside and have a drink. Not drinks as it is today, of course.
Lots of cordials sold in those days.
That's hysterical. Cordial. Let's go and have a cordial on the balcony.
Yes. And I just thought, well, yeah, a good place to start. Ian Black, who was the former cinema manager of the Glenelg Cinema, inspired this project. He used to conduct talks in the mid-90s. I went along to a couple about all the picture theatres that were in the city, and he would start, we're starting on Pulteney Street and we're walking down, and the Rex was the first picture theatre that you would arrive at.
Right, because we used to say in those days, let's go to the pictures. Yeah. It's not the movies or the cinemas, as we say today.
Yeah, that's right. It was the picture theatres.
Yes. Well, they were, I suppose, because the moving picture thing just took the world by storm. Really, I suppose the same as what's been happening during COVID. People have been going onto the download sites and downloading movies instead of being able to go out. I guess we're going through that rebirth of a new way of being entertained now.
Yes, well, I mean, I suppose it's another blow to cinemas because we had first television and then video cassette.
Yes.
And then obviously DVDs, widescreen TVs, and now streaming services, and perhaps it may be reverting back to the Hollywood studios running their own streaming services and also their own picture theatres.
It would make sense. Well, they do in a lot of cases, don't they? The distribution rights go back to the main cinemas, but with more movies being made in a place like Adelaide and certainly in Melbourne, it makes you wonder whether we're going to embrace seeing, our own backyard rather than on the screen at home, whether we really going to want to go to see it on the giant screen that we really haven't got at home.
Yeah, well, whether or not it's going to become more of an event.
Like to go out, like it used to be.
Yes.
I wonder, going back to the old days of cinema, really old days of cinema, because it sort of married together vaudeville and pictures, often there was a sort of a show up front that was live performers, dancing, singing, whatever, and then you'd see the main feature in the second half. Maybe that's got to come back. What do you think?
Perhaps. You never know. Whether or not film festivals will return and be as big as they were too. It's, I think, as I said before, turning it into an event, a night out, a big night out.
Well, it's like the fringes all over the world, and we've just gone through the fringe here in South Australia. People love, it's been very obvious, people love to go out, love to go and see something. And in that way, that social interaction, like if you're watching a comedy in a cinema, when somebody laughs, basically everybody laughs. But when you're sitting at home watching TV, it's a bit of,
well, that's why I remember reading Mel Brooks said that, film comedies need an audience.
Yes.
And they don't need...
Well, all comedy needs an audience. I mean, when you look at the comedians on television, most people don't tend to laugh out loud at home. You just sort of take it for granted, oh, that's funny, whether it is or not, sort of thing. So this passion of yours, what's your plan?
Well, the plan is to, I've already conducted a series of interviews with what I would say are cinema pioneers, and about their experiences, any stories that they may have that are related to a particular picture theatre. Also, we find out that certain studios were aligned with picture theatres, like the Rex was aligned with Paramount when it first opened. So we have I want to complete a comprehensive sort of history on that entertainment precinct.
And it's something that we're going to lose if somebody like you doesn't actually do that. And that's sort of a sad thing in itself, because it's that old thing of if we don't know what came before, how are we going to predict what the future will hold? And history does have a habit of repeating itself.
Well, during my research, I found that the three former Hoyts theatres are now all vacant. So the Regent, which was the last to close,
such a shame.
Yeah, the upstairs section, ran as a retail space for a couple of years, but now that's vacant again. And whether or not you get an entrepreneur to say, we can rebuild it.
Maybe it's got to have some other attraction, like the live show first, or smell-o-vision. Whatever happened to smell-o-vision? We're all expecting, we got 3D, but we can't smell it. Whatever happened to that? Whose idea was that? I remember going to Disneyland and seeing Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I think it was, and during the film, at one point the dog lifted its leg and some water squirted out in your face, and there were all these, physical effects that happened that made the whole movie come to life in a completely different way.
Yeah, I think I experienced that when I saw a Shrek presentation at Universal, similar sort of thing. John Waters, who was quite adventurous as a filmmaker, had a scratch and sniff card back in with the film Polyester around about 1983.
That's right. Yeah. Yes.
So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, I find it interesting though that back in those days, going to the pictures on a Saturday night was what probably half the population did, because if you're going out on a date, if you were, trying to find the love of your life, that was the special thing. You'd buy chocolates, you'd sit there stuffing your face with chocolates, then you'd be getting ice creams and stuff in the intermission, because there was an intermission, wasn't there?
Yeah, well, when I remember going to, say, a film like Earthquake, I saw in the mid-70s, and there was shorts on before the feature presentation. So you'd maybe get a travel log, you maybe get a short documentary, a couple of cartoons.
Right.
And then, yes, you had that intermission, and that was back in the day when a picture like Earthquake had an exclusive season at one particular cinema.
Yes. Well, we're going to come back in a tick and we'll be talking more and showing you some of the old cinemas that we had here in South Australia. See you in a tick. And welcome back to OurTime with Damian Woodards and a bit of reminiscing about going to the movies and the movie houses and what they were like. Damian, the doco you've made about the Rex, it's had a couple of screenings, hasn't it?
Yes, it actually screened at the Cinema Pioneers luncheon just recently. Mm-hmm. And then also I contacted Bob Parr from Wallace Cinemas.
Bob's been on the show talking about the movies.
Yeah, he loves his films.
Oh, he's brilliant.
And obviously he's still working for Wallace Theatres. Mm-hmm. And I just asked him if there was a possibility of getting some screenings, and he said, yeah, we'll put it on with Anne Wills's nostalgia program. So,
right. Well, what's lovely about seeing this is any cinema goer to remember, particularly in my age group, 64 I think I'll be today, we remember those times and we remember what an event it was to go out to the cinema, because you'd go out and have dinner first, and then after you'd seen the movie, whatever it was, and a lot of the films, I suppose back in the 60s and early 70s, had an interval. They also had an overture at the beginning, and then there was an entr'acte to lead you into the second half of the film. And in the meantime, you go out and have your ice cream and talk about the film and wander around and be seen in the foyer.
Yeah, well, that sort of became pretty big with CinemaScope and
yes,
some of the films like Lawrence of Arabia,
My Fair Lady,
Dr. Zhivago,
Round the World in 80 Days. God, we could go on all night.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so they were big films, and of course that's when, because of television, cinema went to widescreen.
I remember going to one of the theatres we'll show you in a tick for those magnificent men in their flying machines. And then there was another one with Jack Lemmon and,
The Great Race.
The Great Race, thank you. Thank you for picking me up on that. That looked just amazing at West Theatre, but we'll show you that in a tick. In fact, we'll show you now what some of the theatres used to look like. And the Grand Old Dame in Adelaide was the upper brother, sister, father, whatever, to the Rex, wasn't it?
Yes, the Regent.
The Regent. And this is what the Regent looked like on the outside, because it was a real landmark in Adelaide. We'll meet you in front of the Regent, people used to say as they walked down the street. And this is what it looked like on the inside. And as you can see, it had a domed arch, a proscenium arch, and it wasn't a specifically big screen as such, but you can see there on one side of in the front, what you could call the orchestra pit, I suppose. What came out of that, Damian?
The theatre organ.
Yes, and that was the real feature, wasn't it, in those days?
Yes, and which you can still experience at the Capri.
Yes, we'll show that in a tick. I guess one of the things were, back in the old black and white days of the 20s, you would often have a full orchestra in the pit. And I guess the Wurlitzer organ, or whatever brand it was they were playing, more or less took over from that.
Yes, it did, yeah.
But this was very ornate, this building, and it had a dress circle, and you really felt like you were going out for the night. So let's look at another one that was here in South Australia. This is West's. West's was originally, before it was called West's, it was called the Winter Garden, I believe. And at the back of the cinema, which is quite a way back from the actual street, the foyer came out to
Hindley Street.
Hindley Street, yes. And the Fly Gallery is still there because they used to do live shows with the movies there.
Yes.
But this cinema was taken over by the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra and looks like this now. So the building has gone back to what it was before, and it's such a shame because it's got a grand staircase inside.
Yeah,
big
that
cinema,
still exists, yes.
and it had that full wraparound screen, didn't it? Now, of the other cinemas that were here, I remember this cinema. It was a tiny little skinny cinema. It was called the York, and you can see how wide that is. And you were saying before there was something about the projection with this?
Yes, I think the throw was quite significant. It was quite higher than the other cinemas.
Because
so
it had a balcony and they had a sloped screen to
Yes.
match the height of the...
I believe so, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but yes.
I remember seeing, I think it was called the Titanic, and I remember I think it was in black and white, and it was quite upsetting as a 13-year-old boy seeing the boat sink and people drown. And I always remember that cinema because of seeing that film there, and of course this is the memory that a lot of people have.
And also you just noticed too there were offices and hairdressers in that building as well as the cinema.
That's right, because they'd be in the front of the cinema sort of thing, and the cinema was at the back. And that is now gone because it became Gawler Place.
That's
with
right,
a fountain right in the middle of it. And I also remember in Rundle Street, when it was a street, the Sturt Cinema, and in Hindley Street there was the State Cinema. And you can see same thing there. I think there were dentists in the front of that building. And you can see all the little air conditioning units up the top. But it was built as a grand building. But as I recall, it was really just a box inside.
Yes, but that still exists today, that facade.
The building does,
Yes,
but
yes,
not the
yeah,
cinema.
Yes. And it actually had a bus stop right out front, I believe, too, as well.
When buses went down the Rundle Mall, yes. Well, here's the next one, which is where I spent many happy hours watching newsreels and old black and white comedies with Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, and going back even before them. What were the name of the two comedians before them? Laurel and Hardy, and all those old black and white silent movies with all of those original stars, Charlie Chaplin, and they'd run movies in this little skinny cinema non-stop from 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, it was what they called continuous sessions in that day, so that you could turn up, and I suppose you could stay all day if you wanted to.
You could.
But they'd usher someone in immediately as soon as someone left the theatre.
I remember screaming at some of the old movies that we saw there, because as a child I'd never seen anything like it. But I do remember seeing Elvis Presley there. It was the first time they started running films as a full-on film with the newsreels and all the other stuff before. Remembering that in these days TV news wasn't as instant as it is now, because they couldn't get the feeds from everywhere. So a week or two later you'd see the news movie reel.
That's right, yes. Well, if you look at the film Newsfront, that looks at the two rival news producers of that day during cinemas, providing certain cinemas with their newsreels, news stories.
Yes, news stories. Because they were old news. By today's comparison, they were really old news. But it was nice to see places from overseas and so on. And I do remember going to this theatre, the Metro. I remember it had a ruched curtain that went up at the beginning of the film, and it was a magic moment to see the curtain go up. And I can actually remember many of the films that I saw there. I just can't think of the names of them this moment, but that was the beauty of going to the cinema. And there's a couple that still remain that are still operational. Let's have a look at this one, because this is one of the old suburban theatres that used to be, well, I think we used to call them bug houses, or flea houses or something. This one's down by the beach.
Yes, the Semaphore.
And you can see by the shape of the building, it's just a block, basically, and with a screen and a candy bar, because no one could survive anymore without candy bars. Now this one we're not sure of. We think this might have been the Thebarton Theatre that's now called the Thebe Theatre, and we think that the proscenium arch, that very ornate arch, has probably gone, but it looks like that, but we're not sure. This one here is the Capri Cinema, and the Capri is still a working theatre, but the thing that's special about it is the interior of the theatre, because as we're looking down the theatre now, we can see the organ that comes up from underneath, and is that the last one that's played in the state?
Yes, I believe so.
I wonder how many more there are around Australia that still have that organ coming out of the floor and playing madly. I know because I've been there, behind the screen there's all the pipes for the organ and all of the drum kits and whistles, and it's absolutely amazing.
Well, I thought you were talking about, say, like cinema being an event, and that's, I think, what the Capri does well, because they always pre-show have an organist do a performance.
Yes. And it really is amazing sort of sitting there and looking at the contraptions work and all of that stuff. It's great to look back at these times, because clearly as we progress in the evolution of man, so to speak, and the evolution of our entertainment, as I was saying before about the Fringe, pulling people in to see live people perform, it's like going back to the days of vaudeville. So what is going to come up next in the cinemas? I don't think we can answer that, but we will be back in a tick. I've spent a lovely 25 minutes reminiscing about the movies with Damian Woodards, who's made a documentary about the Rex Cinema, which sadly no longer exists apart from the photos. But there's one thing we didn't talk about going out. Drive-ins.
Yes, a different world, the drive-ins. I actually worked at a drive-in in the early 80s. So I worked in the canteen there and became a car hop.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And that was what, delivering what people wanted, or?
Well, so no, car hop was, taking the money off the patrons to pay for tickets.
Oh, right, at the beginning, when you drove in.
Yes.
There is still a drive-in here in South Australia. I'm not sure about the other states, but...
Yeah, well, there's obviously Wallace have mainline drive-in going, still operating. Someone I know, I'm part of a group on Facebook about drive-ins, and a couple of brothers opened up the Dandenong drive-in.
Right. Well, through COVID times, that was really the only way people could go out, in the bubble of their car.
Yeah.
You see, and that's that thing of history repeating itself in a way, isn't it? Because during the Spanish flu, going right back, the movie houses were almost decimated during that period, and then suddenly everything's come back to what it was before. So who knows, the future may be big screens, but I love seeing a movie with a bunch of people, hearing them laugh or hearing them be shocked, or, all of those things. Do you still love it, going to the movies?
Yes, I really enjoy it. But yeah, I think what I have appreciated of late is going to where Adelaide has its own film festival.
Yeah.
And
seeing from everywhere.
Premieres and yes.
So the doco you've made and those in the future, how can people see them?
Right. Well, perhaps through the ABC. We'll see how we're going with negotiations there. So,
well, fingers crossed, and also maybe even on community television, as you've seen a bit tonight. Damian, thanks so much for being part of this OurTime program. So until next time, keep yourself nice, go to the movies sometime, and we'll see you soon. Bye.